Hi, David. Did you ever put a pitcher on an innings limit because you knew you would trade him later in the season? Oh, you knew. You knew the way to get on the show. You said hello and you asked a question about the Miami Marlins, and you asked a question that you knew would be of interest for me to talk about as a full segment on Nothing Personal. Sandy Alcantara is a ace for the Marlins, one of the best pitchers in baseball, coming off injuries. He's had Tommy John and various other things. Remember, he's the one who Peter Bendix, the esteemed president of baseball ops for the Marlins, said, oh man, he's throwing 98 right out of the chute in the bullpens to start spring training. Quick side note on that. I'll bet you $1 to your donut that Sandy was not actually throwing 98 in a bullpen, because if Sandy were throwing 98 in the bullpen, I would have gone to the bullpen. I would have taken all the balls away, and I would have said to the pitching coach, you're fired. And I would have said to the assistant pitching coach, see you later. I would have said to the bullpen catcher, take off your equipment and get out of here. Trying to come back from injury, throwing 98 at a bullpen. Here's the players who do that. The ones who have no chance of making the team and have the feeling that they can impress us with velocity in the first few days of spring training, and all we do is release them because they're not impressing us with volume, with volume. That's not the word. They're not impressing us with velocity. It's the opposite. But let's just assume that Sandy is totally healthy and everything's going great. Jeff Passan, the baseball insider for ESPN, wrote that Sandy will be on an innings limit, quote, particularly early in the season, leaving the potential for him to pitch into October if necessary. Of course, October, if necessary, is only if that he's traded to a contender, because the Marlins have a Lutarski's chance of the postseason this year. But he is an incredible asset. The Marlins would be practicing franchise malpractice if they don't trade Sandy to a contender. ESPN did a whole thing where Harold Reynolds said, I think he's going to be traded now. John Morosi said, I think he's going to be traded at the deadline. The general rule is that pitchers of that quality, you get a far bigger return when you trade a pitcher at the deadline than when you trade him at the beginning of spring training. The reason is that the likelihood of a pitcher having a Sabathia-like Brewers run is greater when you get him at the deadline than having him to suffer through an entire season where injuries are an issue. Though Sandy did pitch over 200 innings twice as recently as a couple years ago before he got hurt. But what do you do when you're a team that's plus 2,000 to make the playoffs, when you know you're not going to make it, when you know you're trading a player? Does it make sense to protect that player early and to put him on an innings limit? The question that you specifically asked was, have I ever done that? And the answer is no. And the answer is no, because even in 2013, when we ended up losing 100 games, we have gone into every season. And this may be my delusion. It may be my incompetence. But I went into every season thinking all I needed for the following two things to go right. That's when we had a good team. When you have a bad team, you say, all I need is for the following 12 things to go right. And if they go right, if everything hits the exact way that we imagined during the offseason, this team can compete for a playoff spot through the deadline. And then we're going to take the budget that we always put aside to add, and we're going to bring in the cavalry to try to get back to the playoffs. I never went into a season saying there's no question we're going to lose, we stink, and let's just make sure that our guy doesn't get hurt so we can trade him. There were times when we signed non-roster invites, which is when you sign a veteran player to a deal that if they make the team, you give them $1 million or $2 million. If they don't make the team, you don't know them anything. Mostly as pinch hitters, defensive replacements, insurance at certain positions. And there's no doubt that when we were looking at building our team and deciding the team at the end of spring training, we would look to see who was injured, who was ready to go, and then we would decide which of the non-roster veterans we would add to the team, give them a couple $1 million to play. And one of the things we thought of is that if these players make the team and they have decent seasons, we can move them at the deadline. So we're actually only paying them for half the season if you trade them by the end of June. Remember, a 6-month season, players get paid over 6 months. So if you trade a guy at the end of June, you've paid him half his salary, and the team you trade him for pays the other half because he plays for them July, August, September. So we've done it with marginal players, whether it's a pitcher or a position player. But with your ace, never have done it, can't imagine doing it. Does it make sense for an acquiring team to look at the innings pitched for a particular pitcher that particular year before they decide how much inventory and prospects and others, players, that they would give up to get that pitcher? The number of times that we acquired in-season pitchers is many. We made a ton of deadline acquisitions that were pitchers. I'm trying to think. Hold on. Give me a minute. I'll think of it. The number of times that we did an analysis on the number of innings pitched that particular season. Wait. Oh, yeah, I got it. 0. Whether a pitcher was hurt, whether a pitcher was inconsistent, whatever the case is, we would know what the innings pitched were, but it never had an impact on whether or not we would give a bigger or smaller haul for that pitcher. So if the Marlins think that they're going to get a trade done that's better by having him on an innings limit, they are sorely mistaken.